In this episode of Inside Rugby, I'm going to take a closer look at the game between the South African Springboks and the Argentinian Pumas, played in Buenos Aires yesterday. Hello and welcome to Inside Rugby. My name is Mark, and if you haven't already connected with my channel, hit that little subscribe button and you can be here all the way through the Rugby World Cup. Well, yesterday we saw a game between the South African Springboks and the Argentinian Los Pumas in Argentina. This was one of the warm-up games we're going to be watching before the World Cup, and it was really the last chance for a lot of these players to show their respective coaches what they've got before World Cup selection takes place this week. Both Michael Cheika and Jacques Nienaber are going to be naming their squads this week, and all the players on display, we're going to get an opportunity to show what they had. Now, it was a close game in Johannesburg a week ago between these two sides, so it was going to be interesting to see what happened in Buenos Aires. Jacques Nienaber made 13 changes to the Springboks team that ran out onto the park yesterday in Argentina. And it was going to be really interesting to see whether that group of players had the combinations going and whether or not they were organised. We saw in the All Blacks game against the Wallabies earlier in the day that All Black team that had a lot of changes in the team didn't really function that well in the first half. So it was going to be interesting to see if the Springboks were going to be different. Now, a couple of notable things for this game. The South African captain Bonambi was having his 60th test. And as I've been informed by my South African friends, he's the third black captain of the Springboks in their history. So a great honour for him, that's for sure. Bufali came back into the Argentinian team, and I think that was a good move because they missed his kicking last week in Johannesburg. And it was good to have him back into the team, and also Bertrand back in at halfback as well, which I'm sure was going to make a difference. So the game got underway, and immediately the Springboks started to put the pressure on the Argentinian Pumas. And we saw a concerted effort in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the Springboks getting a lot of possession and putting a lot of pressure on the Argentinians. In fact, they spent most of that time in the Argentinian half and also even deep into the Argentinian 22. So it was a really good start by the Springboks, I thought. We had players like Dean Foree who were really showing a lot of pick up and go. He was getting a lot of ball. And Manie Libbok was really sending the backs wide as well. We saw a lot of impressive play early on from Canan Moodie, and he was really up for this game. So it was a great start by the Springboks in this game, I thought. Now, all that pressure led to a penalty opportunity for Libbok, which he missed in the 4th minute. And it was fair to say that in the first half, Libbok didn't have his kicking boots on. Damian Willemse was playing well at fullback, and during that first 10 or 15 minutes he was injecting himself well, and also he started kicking very well and clearing out from the South African half when the South Africans were in their half in that first 20 minutes, which was not very much of the time. But what I will say was, I think the Argentinian defence was very good in that first 20 minutes. The South Africans could have gone over 3 or 4 times to score tries, but the Argentinians were organised, they were intense, they were powerful, and they repelled the Springboks team. And I think this is something that Michael Cheika has really brought to this Argentinian team since he's taken over. He's got them to think more clearly in defence. They've been more impactful within defence, and they haven't leaked some of those points that they would have done 4 or 5 years ago. So I think that's been one of the big gains for the Argentinians since Cheika's been in charge, is they're able to organise their defence and keep teams out from scoring when they've got raid after raid. And that's exactly what the Springboks did in that first 10 or 15 minutes. They had a lot of possession, they were spreading it wide, but they were also taking it up in the forwards, and the Argentinians' defensive line held very, very well. So Libbok missed an opportunity for the Springboks to go ahead on the scoreboard after having a lot of that pressure. I thought that Cobus Reinhardt started off well at halfback for the Springboks. He was clearing the ball out well. He was going into the mauls looking for the ball as well. And yeah, I was pretty impressed with the way that he started the game. Mumpimpi on the other wing for the Springboks got the ball a couple of times in that first 15 or 20 minutes and showed that he was also hungry to not only get the ball but to get into some breaks. So the signs were really there for the Springboks early on in this game, that they were intense, they were powerful, and they were looking at moving the ball very much against this Argentinian team. One of the other things I noticed that the Argentinians were doing as well in that first 15 or 20 minutes against the Springboks was they were putting a lot of pressure on the inside channels. So when Reinhardt got the ball out to Lebok and onto Esterhazen, they were showing a lot of intent and getting up early and cutting off any potential play or the Springboks making those breaks. So when some of those plays could have gone to extensive breaks, the Argentinian defence was up in the Springboks' face. They were putting the pressure on and they were disrupting those inside channels, and I think the Argentinians did a really good job of that. A little bit later on in the half, and we saw an incident where Marvin Ori charged down a kick from Santiago Carreras, and he nearly scored a try in the corner for the Springboks. It's just one of those things where the bounce of the rugby ball didn't favour Marvin Ori on this particular occasion, and he was a little bit unlucky not to get a try. And at this stage, the South Africans, you kind of thought that it was only a matter of time because they were building momentum in that first 25 minutes of the game, and it was a question of whether the Argentinian defence were able to hold out or whether or not the Springboks were able to get across the line. And again, there was raid after raid towards the Argentinian line, but they just couldn't get across the line. And when they did get across the line, Bonambi got held up, and there was no try from that particular wave of attack from the Springboks. Now, another thing that I think the Argentinians have done well since Michael Cheika has been in charge of the team is when they have got the possession of the ball and they've moved it down to the opposition half, they typically score some points, and that's what happened in this particular game. So I thought that Santiago Carreras' strategic kicking was really good as the half started to go on. He started to move the Argentinians back into the Springboks half, and from that came an ensuing couple of opportunities. The first one was very well taken indeed, where the Argentinians went down the right hand side of the field. It came out to their winger Boffelli, and he nearly made a gap through and scored a try. It got close to the Springbok line, and what actually happened then was there was a disruption in the maul. The infringement came from the Springboks. The Argentinians got a penalty, and Bertrano quickly took the tap, caught the Springboks completely napping, and went over for a try. So you could say it was against the run of play. Springboks up until that stage had a lot of ball and were in possession within the Argentinian 22, but once the Argentinians got down into the Springbok 22, they really made it count, and Bertrano, as I said, caught the Springboks napping and went over for a try almost untouched, and that was converted. So all of a sudden we had Argentina out into the lead, 7 points to 3 after Lebok had got a previous penalty. So against the run of play a little bit, I think, in terms of Argentina getting those particular points, but it started to put a little bit more pressure on South Africa. And what I saw in that first half, as it started to go on a little bit more, was the South Africans were getting a little bit rattled. They knew they'd had a lot of possession. They knew they were down in the Argentinian half and 22 for a lot of that first 20 minutes. And they didn't come away with the amount of points that I think they thought they were going to have. And as a result of that, their discipline started to fall off a little bit. And we saw in the last 10 minutes of the first half the South African discipline really going off the rails, and quite a number of penalties coming in for the Argentinians. The other thing that I thought the Argentinians did well in that first 30 minutes of the first half was contesting for the high ball. Willemse and Lebok were putting up strategic kicks, and every time they did, there was Argentinian competition in for those kicks. Moody did well in recapturing a couple of those high balls, but we saw Bertrano and we saw Carreras and Boffelli in there as well, collecting those high balls. So competing for the high ball was something that Argentina did very well in that first 30 odd minutes of the game. And then as we headed towards half time, Cobus Reinhardt had a lost the head moment, and he pulled one of the Argentinians out of a play who didn't have the ball. He got penalised for that, and the Argentinians got a penalty. Boffelli put it over, and we saw Argentina then go to the lead of 10 points to 3. So it was a bit disappointing to see the Springboks lose their discipline a little bit at the back of the first half. I thought they had lots of opportunities to score points. They probably got frustrated by the fact that they didn't do that, and as a result they actually ended up down to 14 men because Mostert got sent off for a yellow card for tackling Santiago Carreras without the ball. And that kind of summed up the first half for the Springboks, I thought. Frustrating. They didn't get the points that I think they thought they were deserving of that first half. They definitely put a lot of pressure on the Argentinians in that first 20 minutes. But hey, kudos to the Argentinians. Their defence was good. They disrupted those mauls when they needed to. They kept the South Africans out of their line. And I think they played really, really well in defence. And as I said, that's another thing that Cheika has really installed in this Argentinian team. So we went to half-time at 10 points to 3. And it was going to be a question of whether or not the Springboks were able to keep that amount of possession going in the second half and then actually turn it into points. In that first half, I thought Fori played very, very well. He was busy around the rucks and mauls. He was good in the line-out clearances as well. Marvin Ori had a good first half for the Springboks, and a lot of the Springboks backs were getting involved. The two wingers, Mumpimbi and Kanan Moody, were both hungry for the ball. I thought, except for his kicking at goal, Lebok had a pretty good first half. He was strategic with his kicking. Willemse from the back was injecting himself and was very good at clearing out of the Springboks 22 when he had to do clearing kicks. Esterhazen was a little bit quiet in the first half, had a couple of good runs, but and Lacano Arm was there as well, injecting himself into the back line. So the Springboks had a number of players that were standing out in that first half. They were playing well, and it was interesting to see what was going to happen in the second half. Well, it didn't take long for us to find out what was going to happen in the second half, because with only 2 minutes gone, Mumpimbi went over for a try for the Springboks after an intensive workout for the Springboks and leading up to the try. Down the left-hand side, Mumpimbi straight ahead and basically untouched for the try. So that was converted, and it appeared that South Africa were straight back into this game. It was 10-all after just 42 minutes of the game. So this really set up the intensity, I think, for the Springboks, and that try really helped them get going in the second half, because from there on in, it was a different Springboks team. I felt they started to grow in confidence, and they put behind that first half and the frustration, I think, that was building. And we didn't have to wait much longer at all before the Springboks scored again. It was a really good work try. Lebok did a cross field kick to Moody. He caught the ball and ran in for a untouched try for the Springboks. So straight out to 15 points to 10 for the Springboks early in the second half. Lebok was unable to get that particular conversion, but the Argentinians came back with their own penalty a few minutes later, so we were back to 15-13. And there was thoughts around close game again, like we had last week in Johannesburg. But I sensed that this was a different Springboks team and attitude in the second half. They really came out with the same intensity as they played in that first 15 minutes or so of the first half, but they seemed to be making a bigger impact. And I think a lot of the defensive effort the Argentinians put in that first half was probably starting to show from an energy point of view. 2 quick tries to the Springboks in that early second half, and then the pressure continued and the Springboks really started to open up the play. Argentina started to fall off their defence, and then their discipline started to fall away. So penalties came thick and fast for the Springboks. Lebok ended up getting another couple of penalties and a third one, and before we knew it, it was 21 points to 13 to the Springboks after about 60 minutes. At that stage, Argentina had conceded 9 penalties to the Springboks 12, and that was only because the Springboks conceded a lot of penalties in the back end of that first half. Another notable moment in this game was when Augustine Creeley came on for the Argentinians. The prop has played 100 test matches now for his country, and that is the highest number of any Argentinian rugby player in history. So a proud moment for him, for his team and for his country. And he got to spend 10 minutes on the field replacing Montoya in the end of the game. But at that stage, it was looking like it was going to be a Springboks win anyway. In that last 10 minutes, there was not to be any substantial comeback from the Argentinians on this occasion. and they played very, very well in that second half, I thought, the Springboks. So considering there were 13 changes in the Springboks team this weekend, I think they did really, really well as far as organisation. As long as the game went on, I saw more and more combinations together. Esterhuizen was good in the back with Arm. Willemse was playing well at fullback. I thought the Bok and Reinhardt were doing well until Herschel Yankees came on as well. And I thought the forwards were doing really, really well. The tight three in the Springboks had it over the Argentinians in the second half. Bonambi ended up getting replaced after 60 minutes, but he had a good game in the first 60 minutes and did really, really well as captain for the team. So yeah, a really good combination for the Springboks. I think Jacques Nienaber will be happy with this particular performance. Most of all, it gave him an opportunity to have a look at those players who were probably having a little bit of a question mark over them, and whether or not they performed well enough to be included in this team. We saw Evan Roos come on in the second half. He played well, was busy into everything, and really across the park I couldn't fault many of the Springboks. I'd be interested to know from my Springboks fans out there who you thought had the better game. Did Willemse do well enough at fullback? Is he going to be covering that position or as a utility back? And did you think the two wings played well? I thought Mumpimpi and Moody were both very good this weekend, both hungry for the ball. And that's really, for me, the mainstay of a winger is go looking for the ball, go looking for the opportunities. They were both good under the high ball, and they were both good at looking to create space in between the Argentinian backline. So overall, a very strong performance, I thought, from the Springboks. I also thought it was a good performance from Argentina. Now, Argentina's in Pool D of the Rugby World Cup this year. Their biggest foe is going to be England and Japan, and I see England having a lot of trouble with this Argentinian team, particularly after the English game with the Welsh yesterday as well. Now, don't forget to check out my video on that game. I've reviewed the Wales-England game that was played at the Principality Stadium yesterday. So in current form, I would put Argentina ahead of England, that's for sure. I know that wasn't England A team that played yesterday, but in saying that, I think this Argentinian team is coming together more and more with good combinations. And on any given day, I think they can beat any team in the world if they have a good 80 minutes of rugby. So let me know what you think about that. Pool D, it's going to be an interesting pool. Maybe Japan can get up and beat England. Wouldn't that cause a bit of an upset? And I'm sure we are going to see upsets in this Rugby World Cup. So a good performance by the Springboks yesterday, travelling to Buenos Aires and having a good win, particularly after that close game in Johannesburg last week, and also after having 13 changes made to their team. So I would say mission accomplished for the Springboks, and now Jacques Nienaber and his team can sit down and make their assessments to pick that World Cup squad that's going to come out this week. And I'd really like to hear what you thought of the game yesterday between the Pumas and the Springboks. Let me know in the comments, and stick around. We're going to see lots more rugby here on this channel, lots of reviews and previews coming up. I'm looking at most of the games that were played this weekend as far as warm-up games go. So don't forget, hit that subscribe button and come and join me on Inside Rugby. So there we go, that's it for this video, everybody. I hope to hear from you all soon. Stay well, stay safe, and don't forget, enjoy your rugby. Bye for now.